Finding the win condition in a game that seems lost can be one of the hardest skills to learn in the Pokemon trading card game. While this is always an important skill in any trading card game, I think it's particularly important right now in the Pokemon TCG. The way that the format has been for the past year or two, almost any deck has a chance to win any matchup. This is a lot different than it has been in the past, where matchups were much more polarizing and metagaming was far more important. Now we see most matchups being 50-50 or 60-40 at worst. In Pokemon, there are 3 ways to win a game. To win by taking all 6 prize cards, knocking out your opponent's last Pokemon in play, and if your opponent doesn't have any cards in their deck at the start of their turn. Those are the win conditions of the game, but that's not what most people are talking about when they use the phrase win condition. Usually what people are talking about is the set of circumstances that will most likely lead to a win, or what string of actions will increase my odds of winning the most. First off, we have to know whether we're behind or ahead in the game, and that may seem obvious, but just simply being ahead on prize cards isn't enough. To figure this out, we need to figure out the number of attacks either player needs to win. If we need less attacks to win, we're ahead in the prize trade, and vice versa. Knowing what the opponent is going to want to do is an important part of finding win conditions when behind in a game, but it can also be helpful when we're really far ahead in a game. So when we're really far ahead in a game, we want to figure out what our opponent's win conditions are or what our lose conditions are. In these types of games, we're going to not want to take unnecessary risks. We're going to try to make our board more stable, whether that's putting an extra support Pokemon in play or establishing a backup attacker or two. We're trying to decrease the odds that we whiff something, and we're going to want to figure out what the opponent might do to try and come back in the game and thin out any cards that don't help us play around that. The way that I like to think about it is just figuring out what cards I would not want to draw off of an Iono and getting rid of them. I think it's pretty rare that people thin too many cards out of their deck, but it is something worth noting. For example, a deck like Guardy, it might be intuitive to just play every single Poffin out of our hand, but it could also be worth saving one if we're playing a Drifloon and we want to have an item that we can grab off Arven to find our attacker. It's always worth considering when getting rid of the last copy of a card in a deck, is there any way that not having this card could lose me the game? And we always want to be considering what our opponent is going to end up attacking with. Like maybe we have 2 prizes left and they can attack with a single prize Pokemon, or they can attack with something that we can't one-shot. Then we want to save our boss's orders or play Palpad and put 2 boss back in the deck. Maybe do something like Super Odd for Iron Bundle and bench it. Just start thinking of ways how we can play around what they could do. It's also worth noting to be considerate of at what point in a turn we use a Palpad. Like if we expect that our opponent is going to Iono us, we might want to use the Palpad at the end of the turn instead of using it before we use draw abilities. That way we don't draw into it off of one of our draw abilities and it stays in the deck, increasing the odds that we see it off of an Iono. Here's an example of a game that we're ahead. How would we want to play out this hand to make it most likely that we end up winning the game? Well, we would definitely want to attach an energy to our Revavroom. One of the ways that they could win is to bring up something that we can't retreat and start sniping our bench with their Screamtail. And the only thing on the board that we can't retreat in one attachment or attack with is the Revavroom, so getting it ready to retreat is a good idea. Another thing we could do is just Super Add back in 3 energy. This way if they do go for that play, we're more likely to draw the second energy and be able to retreat it. And the only other option that I would see for them to win is to be able to attack with something that we can't knock out in one hit. And since both their Guardies are already damaged, they would need to be able to Turo one up and put it back in play in order to attack with something with enough HP. And since we already have Boss in hand and we see that they have a Hero's Cape in play, we know that they can't heal one of their Pokemon and disrupt our hand in the same turn. And even if they could heal and disrupt our hand in the same turn, there's not really much else that we could do. Like if we had a hand with Nest Ball and we played Iron Bundle, we could probably just bench that. There's also certain matchups where the win condition could be something that we have to do on the first turn of the game. This would be something like stopping aggressive deck from being able to take 2 prizes, and we would want to do something like put a single prize Pokemon in the active and one on the bench to play around Iron Bundle. And when we're up against decks that can retreat lock, we're going to want to not bench support Pokemon or anything that can't attack. These types of win cons are going to require previous matchup knowledge, and we're also going to need to know what we're up against. So it's always important to not just autopilot the first turn of the games and take a moment to think what deck we're playing against and what Pokemon we want to have in play. We should always be considerate of this, but we don't want to go to the point where we play around what our opponent could maybe do so much that we sacrifice our own setup. I see this a lot with Iono. Like if someone sees their opponent go first and not really do very much with their hand, and the only supporter that they have is Iono, they might not play it, hoping that the opponent is bricking. And there's really only two situations that we should not play the Iono. One is that our hand is good enough where we can get our board fully set up and we don't need to find anything for next turn. And the second would be that we think the matchup is completely unwinnable, and the only way that we can win is if our opponent bricks and we top deck out of it first. But what do we do when we're really far behind in a game and the game seems lost? So first we have to think about what it really means to be behind in a game. And all it means is that we need more time than our opponent. That means we need to find a way to get some extra turns. And this is why it's so important to evaluate who's actually ahead in the game every single turn. The sooner we realize that we're behind in the game, the more chances that we're going to have to get our free turn. This might seem obvious, but if we don't really consider what the deck we're facing is actually capable of, we could easily assume that we're ahead in the game when our opponent is sitting there thinking that everything is going perfectly according to their plan. This is where matchup knowledge and knowledge about decks in the meta is really important. Ways to get better at this can be playing a difficult matchup from the other side to better understand what the other deck wants to do or what the vulnerabilities of the deck are. Watching matchups from major events can be really helpful for this too. It can also help us get different ideas of plays that we can do with whatever deck we're playing. The first thing we need to do in these situations is start thinking of what could possibly happen that would lead to a victory. Obviously, in something like game 1 of a best of 3, and it's a real long shot that we're going to win, we're going to want to scoop those games. But if it's best of 1 or we're in a game 3 type of situation, it's going to be better to go for a play that has a 1% chance of winning than doing something that has no chance. The number of games I've seen with a board state similar to this, and the player on the left just attacks when all the other player has to do is promote and announce that they win, is kind of crazy. In this type of situation, we're better off doing literally anything other than just attacking with our 2 prize Pokemon. And it's obviously going to be a long shot to win this game, but this is why it's so important to realize that we're behind as soon as possible. But this is when we should be looking through our opponent's discard pile and keeping track of their resources, like maybe there's a bunch of energy in there and a Super Rod and a Turo. We can boss up something that they can't attack with and hope that they have no way to retreat. And this is why it's so important to know the counts in typical meta decks, because these types of situations can pop up more often than you would think. So even if we know the exact counts of everything in their deck and say they have like 1 energy left and 1 Turo or something like that, and they have 2 prize cards, maybe our only win condition is that both of those cards are prized and we still have to just stall and play for deck out. Or maybe we can take some prizes with a single prize Pokemon, then our win condition would be that they don't have boss the next turn. Things like this might have really low odds of working out, but if we never try it, it's never going to work and we're just going to lose the games anyway. Also, in these best of 1 or game 3 type scenarios, we should never assume that our opponent sees the winning play and just scoop. Everyone makes mistakes and we should make them play it out, or at least show us that they see the play to win. And the further behind we are in a game, the more risk we have to take. The way that I kind of think about this is just asking myself, do I just lose anyway? This will most often come up at pivotal points in a game when deciding whether or not to go for a big play that requires us to hit a lot of pieces. When considering whether or not to go for the play, we just have to ask ourselves, do I just lose anyway? Or is there any possible way that I win if I miss this play? Like maybe we're playing Miraidon and the board kind of looks like this, and we're trying to decide where to put the energies that we hit off our generator. We still have Prime Catcher and another generator in the deck. Sure, if we put the energy on the Iron Hands, there might be no way that we get an attack off unless we hit the exact pieces we need, but do we just lose the game if we don't hit all those pieces anyway? And the answer would be yes. Our opponent is going to win next turn no matter what we do, so we just have to play that we're going to hit the Prime Catcher and the generator and hit energies off of the generator. Yeah, sure, it's a long shot, but thinking about it this way makes it clear that our only option is to go all out for this big play. So we need to figure out that we're behind and exactly how far behind we are, meaning how many extra turns we need. And there are really only a few ways to buy time in Pokemon. We can get the opponent to take less prize cards, like attacking with a 1 prize Pokemon, stop them from attacking at all, like boss stalling something, or bringing up something that they can't attack with and hitting into it, planning to knock it out later in the game with some type of residual damage. Using cards like Crushing Hammer or Temple of Sinnoh, things that would disrupt their energy, would also fall into this category, as well as attacking with Pokemon like Mimikyu or Cornerstone Ogerpon that the opponent isn't able to hit into. We can deny them from taking prize cards by attacking with something that they can't knock out, or attacking with it, tanking a hit, and then healing it next turn. Or we can take more prize cards at once, like using Monkey Dory to finish off a knockout, or using attacks that hit multiple Pokemon like Dragapult, Greninja, Delphox. Then there are things like Iron Hands, or using Briar to take extra prizes on the same Pokemon. Or we can use something like Dusknoir to sacrifice prizes but let ourselves take more prize cards in the same turn. Now, I've been working on this video for quite a while now, coming up with the script and ideas and everything, and possibly the most perfect match happened at EUIC this weekend. So this is the top 4 match that happened at EUIC between Simone and Natalie. This is Dragapult Dusknoir versus Archaludon with a Dialga line. This is a really hard matchup for Dragapult, since Dragapult's attacks don't one-shot the Archaludon, and the Archaludon player has up to 5 chances to heal their Pokemon with the 2 Turos, Scoop Up Cyclone, and Palpad. And since Dragapult is almost always forced to 2-shot, there's always going to be an opportunity for Archaludon to heal. The only way that Dragapult can take an effective 1-shot is to use a Dusknoir combined with a Dragapult attack, but that is also super awkward because Archaludon's going to take the first prize, and it's going to be a single prize. Then popping the Dusknoir will just put them back onto even prizes and make it even easier for them to win the game. The game starts off exactly how you would think, both players set up, and the Archaludon player is able to take the first prize card, which is all fine and good. It is what is expected to happen. But after Natalie attacks into the first Archaludon, Simone is instantly able to respond with a Turo to heal. The next turn, Natalie is able to respond with a Counter Catcher onto a Duraludon, taking that out and then putting enough residual damage on the Archaludon so that the Dragapult can knock it out with the 200 damage. So now Natalie's prize map is pretty clear. She's going to knock out the Archaludon with 100 damage on it, and then try and knock out the Lumineon off the bench, combined with a Dusclops to knock out the Greninja and take the last 3 prize cards. So at this point in the game, her win condition is that her opponent is not able to go down to a single prize next turn by bossing up Rotom and knocking it out with the Dialga. Because if her opponent goes down to a single prize card, Natalie is not able to use the Dusknoir without losing the game. And unfortunately for Natalie, that is exactly what happens. Simone is able to boss up the Rotom and take it out. Now Natalie needs to come up with a new win condition. She decides to Counter Catcher the Archaludon and Iono. That's going to give the highest odds, because if she were to leave the Dialga in the active, all that Simone would need is a single energy to use the V-Star attack of Dialga and skip Natalie's turn and win the game by knocking out the active Dragapult. This was played pretty perfectly by Natalie because getting the Dusknoir in play kind of forces the opponent to want to boss a 2-prizer and go down to a single prize card, because going down to 2 prizes would mean that Natalie can just win by popping the Dusknoir in the next turn, and going down to 1 prize means that Iono is just going to be that much more effective. Now she can 2-shot through the Archaludon in the active and also knock out the Duraludon with the residual damage from the Dragapult attack, as well as moving a single damage onto it with Radiant Alakazam. And it ends up working out perfectly for Natalie. Simone gets nothing off of the Iono to 1 and is forced to just pass the turn and let Natalie win the game or concede. This was also a good example of a do I just lose anyway situation where, yeah, sure, counter catching up the Archaludon. If Simone draws a Professor Turo, it moves it out of the active and heals all the damage and makes it that much harder for Natalie to win. But even if she doesn't counter catcher it up and damage it, if Simone were to draw the Turo, Natalie just loses anyway, because Simone can just pick up the Archaludon off the bench, evolve the other Duraludon, and get enough energy in play to use Dialga's V-Star attack. So Natalie loses regardless if Simone were to draw a Turo. So counter catching up the Archaludon removes a basic energy or a Night Stretcher as an out for Simone to win the game. The next game, Natalie starts Rotom and she's going second. She has a kind of a mediocre start, is able to pop in for a couple Dreepies and has Badoo in hand, so she decides to retreat the Rotom into Badoo, So she does have the opportunity to use Itchy Pollen to item lock here, but decides to draw with Rotom since her hand wasn't really the best, and item locking here probably wouldn't do very much at all. We're really just retreating to not give up 2 prizes for free, and retreating to Badoo is far better than retreating to a Dreepy. Simone takes a turn and ends up having to get rid of 2 Night Stretchers, which is something that starts to become relevant because Natalie ends up missing an attack on the next turn. On Simone's next turn, use Iron Bundle to put Natalie in a pretty awkward spot. Everything on Natalie's bench is pretty valuable. She can't promote one of the Pokemon that would give up 2 prizes, that would just put her too far behind. She also doesn't want to promote the Dreepy with the energy attachment or the Dricloak that can draw cards. So Duskull is the only option here, and that removes any possibility of being able to take a one-shot on either Dialga or Archaludon next turn. At this point, Natalie knows that she's really far behind in the game and is going to need to find a way to buy a turn or 2 at some point. So she starts going for it right away with a counter catcher on the Dialga with no energy and an Iono. Simone is able to fully power up the Dialga for the V-Star attack on the next turn, and as soon as Natalie notices this, she grabs the discard pile and starts going for it, looking for alternate win conditions because at this point there's almost no way that Natalie will ever be able to win the game by taking prizes. Natalie would need for Simone to miss multiple turns of attacking in order to win on prizes. So Natalie is keeping track of what's in the discard pile, and there's like 3 Night Stretchers, 2 Turo, Palpad, Scoop Up Cyclone, and Thornton in there. And we know for sure that this is what Natalie is keeping track of in the discard because she moves all these cards to the top of the discard pile. Whenever I do this and move around a bunch of cards in my opponent's discard, I usually give it a quick shuffle after just so my opponent won't know exactly what I was looking at. Now Simone uses the V-Star attack, and on the next turn is thinking, what can I do to make it least likely that Natalie can make some sort of comeback? Simone ends up deciding that stretching for Fez to make Nest Ballin' out to draw cards off of a knockout to try and get Boss or something like that is going to increase the odds of winning the most, and uses the last Night Stretcher for Fezandipity. This might seem like a big deal, but it's really not. Every single energy except for 1 is in play, so having the Night Stretcher wouldn't help at all. The real mistake here was super unintuitive, and I think a lot of people would have made the same mistake in this situation. It was when Simone decided to use the Scoop Up Cyclone on the Archaludon that didn't have any energy on it. Picking up the one with the energy might seem wrong because you want to leave an attacker set up, but not picking up that one meant that all the energy except for 1 is in play, and there's no way to gain access to them if none of the Pokemon get knocked out. Now anything with a 2 retreat cost can just be stuck in the active spot and can never be retreated. So Natalie recognizes that she can't win by attacking, there's plenty of time left so she's not super worried about scooping too fast, and goes for the boss play on the Archaludon. And since Natalie has more cards left in deck, she's going to end up winning this game by deck out. This was probably the most perfect match to happen for this video because both these games Natalie had pretty low odds to win, but she was able to recognize that she was losing the game and went for the plays that would give her a chance to win the game. And it ended up paying off. So almost every turn of every game we should be considering, how am I going to win this game and how is my opponent going to win? Who is going to win the game first? If I'm going to win first, can I make my board stronger and thin out dead cards to make it less likely that I brick? And how can my opponent win, and is there any way I can play around it? If I'm not going to win first, how many turns do I need to buy back to win the game? What strategies can my deck use to gain extra time? Is there a way I can stop my opponent from attacking or make it less likely that they get a meaningful attack off? Can I disrupt their hand and start taking out their draw engine? Would it mess with them more to knock out their attacker or one of their support Pokemon? Keep track of my opponent's resources. Are they running low on anything? Always check the discard pile, and always consider what needs to happen for me to win the game. And if there are multiple answers to that, which one is most likely? Because as we just saw, if these types of plays can work out top 4 of an IC, then they can work basically anywhere. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I'm sure you'll like this one that I made on sequencing, and I have a whole playlist of the Learn the TCG series.